California PC 832 powers to arrest. This is the training that you are going to need that is mandated in order to be California Penal Code 1299 compliant. So California Penal Code 832 training is made up of two components, which are powers to arrest, which is 40 hours, and firearms, which is 20 hours. For bounty hunters, bail agents, and private investigators, anybody bounty hunting in California, only the powers to arrest, the 40 hours, module is required. You don't have to get the firearms training, which I would encourage anybody carrying a firearm to receive that training, but you're not mandated. Under California Penal Code 832, there's no requirement for firearms familiarity training, but there is for the powers to arrest. You can get that training separately. There's no requirement for you to get that training all in one go, even if you are planning to get both of those learning domains. But for anybody bounty hunting to be compliant with 1299, PC 1299, only the powers to arrest, which is 40 hours, is sufficient. In addition to the 20 hours classroom training for the bail agent education, which is something completely different than California PC 832. Originally, California Penal Code 832 was designed as a minimum training requirement for law enforcement. But it has become an industry standard in the private sector for work in related fields such as security, loss prevention, and bounty hunting. Peace officers that are limited peace officers, like county corrections, is what PC 832 was originally designed for. If you're a full-time peace officer, PC 832 is something that you have because it's a part of your academy. Okay? But it was designed for limited peace officers, for folks working county corrections, and for a reason, because their training and their academy is much different than a police officer or even a correctional officer working for the state of California. People who work county corrections, their academy is approximately 5 weeks long. It's very minimal training, so they're not the same when they're off duty, because they're limited peace officers. They're not the same as somebody who's a full-time cop or a sheriff. In addition to that, some security companies actually mandate PC 832. In California, certain companies will not hire you unless you obtain or are able to obtain your California PC 832 powers to arrest certificate at the very least. And if you're armed, then they would want the familiarity of firearms training component as well. It's just become an industry standard, and because the state of California is so good in commissioning training like PC 832, which is standardized in law enforcement, it's very good training. It's exceptional. Many security companies decide to make that a requirement for hiring in the private sector. So, and PC 832 must be administered by a commission on post, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training, a certified institution or instructor. So, again, a community college or police or sheriff's academy will suffice. Powers to arrest continued. PC 832 powers to arrest encompasses training in California Penal Code, search and seizure, cursory and in-custody search, use of force, defense tactics, and the use of mechanical wrist restraints, which is basically just handcuffing techniques. It's a 40-hour course, which will generally run for about 5 days. 3 days of that, you will focus on classroom training, which deals with California state law. All right. Most important thing that you're going to gain from your PC 832 powers to arrest course, I would say, is the use of force. In addition to the handcuff techniques, and the defensive tactics are cool too, but the use of force is important to understand because there's different levels of force in the escalation of force continuum. That's important to note because that's an industry standard. Even though you're acting as a private person, the use of force is important to understand because it's going to enable you to safely handle a situation whereby you minimize the risk of injury to yourself and to others, and help you better affect a citizen's arrest of a fugitive in a nice and professional, standardized manner where you can later on reasonably articulate your behavior or your activities as a bounty hunter. That way you know what you're doing, or at least you're going to sound like you know what you're doing, if such ever goes to criminal or civil court. Again, PC 832, powers to arrest, does not make you a law enforcement or a peace officer. Neither does being compliant with Penal Code 1299 as a bounty hunter, bail agent, or private investigator. So remember, even though PC 832 was designed as a minimum requirement for law enforcement or peace officers, it doesn't make you so, because you're not employed by a law enforcement organization. You haven't been vetted. You're not a sworn officer or agent. California PC 832 powers to arrest post certificate is valid for 3 years unless you are active law enforcement. So anybody who is active law enforcement, remember, your PC 832 certificate does not expire so long as you're active law enforcement, even if you're working county corrections. Okay, as long as you're active law enforcement, that certificate is good, and you don't have to renew that. California PC 832 powers to arrest continued. PC 832 powers to arrest will especially teach you California's codification of criminal law, muscle memory, and a methodical and systematic way of effecting arrests, which will establish a form of procedure which will become second nature. That's the thing about muscle memory, is the more you practice, right, the more natural that activity becomes. And when you're faced with a situation where which the situation calls upon your training, you're going to act or react how you're trained, right? So the more training, the better you're going to react, okay? You never want to find yourself in a situation where you forget your training. And that's happened with law enforcement. We've seen cases where certain stress factors and other contributing elements create a situation where even peace officers forget their training, or they either forget their training, fail to act, or they overreact and act completely opposite to what their training says to do in such a case. And that's also been known as the slip and capture phenomenon, which is a defense used by law enforcement. But remember, you're not law enforcement as bounty hunters, bail agents, and private investigators. But you should encourage yourself to train often. You should train as much as law enforcement, if not more. And if you're actively bounty hunting, you're probably going to get all the training you need on the job. So long as you follow your PC 832 training the way that you're taught, and you implement that in your daily routine, and you're constantly, frequently effecting arrests as a bounty hunter, bail agent, or private investigator, you're going to get good at what you do, and it will become second nature. But you'll still have to renew your PC 832 certificate because you're not law enforcement, and it expires after 3 years. So situational awareness is going to be another component to your training during your mainly your defense tactics training in PC 832, powers to arrest. You'll go over situational awareness and, of course, as previously discussed, escalation of force. California PC 832 powers to arrest continued. Situational awareness. So Jeff Cooper was a U.S. Marine and also a training instructor, mainly with firearms. But he developed a awareness code, or a color code, also known as color-coded awareness, whereby you gauge your level of awareness by constantly monitoring your own feedback loop while assessing your environment. So there's different levels and stages of being alert, and if you learn to color code those stages of alertness, right, you're going to be better prepared to react to a situation adequately, because you're going to be cognizant that there is a situation, as opposed to what you see general public. Most folks are distracted by their smartphones. So I would say, and as I've been told by folks in the field of law enforcement, most people are in condition white, which is like when you're getting up out of bed, you're still half asleep, you're in condition white. With the advent of cell phones, that's where most people's level of awareness is. It's like they're sleepwalking, they're on their phone, not paying attention. We've heard of incidents where people are playing Pokemon Go and walk off of cliffs looking for virtual cartoon characters in augmented reality, and they're walking off of cliffs looking for Pokemons because they're not aware of their surroundings, the real reality of their surroundings. So the different levels of color-coded awareness are white, yellow, orange, and red. Again, white is like when you're just getting up out of bed and you're walking around, you're half asleep, you're going to the bathroom, or you're maybe multitasking, but you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. Yellow is the condition of awareness where most people are at in their day-to-day lives, with the exception of if they're on their cell phone. But yellow is where you're alert, aware, and you're going on about your day. Now, they say that's the level where you should be at as a security officer, a peace officer, or anybody that deals in a situation where you can expect conflict, especially. But I would say that when you get to orange, orange is like you're perceiving what could be a threat, but it hasn't yet been confirmed, right? That's orange. Red is when there is an obvious threat, like somebody just starts swinging on you, trying to fight you. You go into red. Now you have to react. So what are you going to do? You're going to run away, or are you going to stick around and fight? And you'll learn about fight or flight as well during your California PC Powers to Arrest course. I would say you always want to be in between yellow and orange, especially if your job is dealing with conflict, or where you're frequently finding yourself in situations dealing with the public and you're expected to react to conflict, whether you're a security officer, you're a cop, you're a bounty hunter. You always want to be between yellow and orange. You don't want to always be perceiving everything as a possible threat, but you want to be inquisitive enough and observant enough to question every single encounter that you have with people, or just the fragments that make up your environment, piece by piece. You want to really just scan everything around you and always have yourself ready. And we'll get into your interview stance as well. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the escalation of force, or the use of force continuum. Meta-cognition is thinking about thinking. That is when you second guess yourself. Why are you perceiving something as a potential threat, right? The more you get into the mode of really questioning yourself, first and foremost, because you're going to be observant and you're going to question your surroundings, your people. You're going to be inquisitive as a fugitive investigator. You're going to be more inquisitive than most, because you have to be, because due to the nature of the risk that's involved in bounty hunting. But you also want to question yourself. You want to question your own biases. And metacognition is basically you tuning in to how you are perceiving everything, from sound to visually, and really reflecting on the overall environment. That way you can be more aware of the situation, which is situational awareness. There's a baseline or norm for an environment, just like there is for people, right? When somebody's acting unusual, somebody might have a medical condition. They might have a disability as well. So your situational awareness is not just the awareness of an environment, but it's also of a situation and people. You don't want to take somebody into custody that has an injury and you're trying to hook them up and arrest them and get them into your mechanical wrist restraints, and then somebody catches you on video And what it looks like is you're practicing MMA on a disabled person. So you want to really be cognizant of how you approach people. You want to know about, does the subject or fugitive have a medical condition, a disability, whether it be mental or physical. You want to be cognizant of these things. That way, you don't create any liability aside from what you can already potentially face just because people don't like authority figures. Again, it doesn't take much to get slapped with a civil lawsuit. So always be cognizant of that. Size up the scene, just like you size up people, right? So always look for threats in an environment. And there's also what is known as crime prevention through environmental development. The environment basically plays a big psychological role in how people behave within that environment. So you want to size up the scene and size up environments for any vulnerabilities in the environment, anything that could put you at a disadvantage, anything that could put your fugitive at an advantage, right? Is there little areas they can run and cut through if you start chasing them, right? And if so, and you have adequate backup, and maybe you're working not just as one bounty hunter, but you have a group of bounty hunters, you might want to have people in place as a security measure and as a precaution to step in the event that your fugitive takes flight or goes afoot. So the dynamics of a situation can change fast. Anytime you're dealing with people, especially with the criminal element, if somebody is known to commit crimes, if somebody is in and out of jail, and they have a background, especially where they're violent or they're known to not be very respectful of authority figures, you want to be cognizant of all these things, because the dynamics of a situation can change fast, especially when people are already being chased. They didn't go to court because they didn't want to go to court to begin with. So now you have a fugitive, and in most cases, people just don't want to be caught. It's just a matter of how much effort are they willing to put in to evade being captured. And that is oftentimes determined by the severity of the nature of the offense, which they've committed to put themselves in that predicament in the first place. So, body language. You will learn a little bit about that in the PCA 32 Powers to Arrest course. Usually there is body language that comes before somebody either becomes aggressive or takes flight. This is not a course on body language, but for example, if you study people's body language, when somebody points their feet in a certain direction, that usually means that's the direction they're planning on going in next, right? Unless it's someone that's cognizant of their body language and they're very good at keeping their composure, like law enforcement, military personnel, even security officers are more cognizant of how they behave and act than just the average person that doesn't have that level of training. So you want to really study up on people's body language, because things like somebody fidgeting around might be an indicator that they're going to take a swing at you, which is why you want to always keep distance, and we'll go over that as well in the next slides to come. But you want to always practice readiness. You always want to be balanced and have a stance where you can't just be pushed over. You don't want to get too close to people or be too far away, because you always want to maintain control. So in order to be in control, you want to keep a distance to where you can react adequately if a situation prompts you to do so. Active listening is especially important for interviews, but can come useful in other situations as well. Sometimes the only contact you're going to have with your fugitive is after you've exhausted all resources. You went looking for your person all over town or in the county, all throughout the state maybe, and sometimes all you really have is their phone number. And obviously you don't want to call them during the preliminary phase of an investigation, because then they're going to know that you're looking for them, which they already know because they have a warrant for their arrest, but then they're going to really know that you're looking for them. So what you want to do is you want to know how to build a rapport, you want to get good at rhetoric, verbal judo, negotiations, and you want to really become a good active listener, because sometimes your last resort is going to be to call your fugitive and to talk to them and to say, hey, you've got a warrant, you violated your bond, your contractual agreement with my client. If you surrender yourself, I'll see what I can do for you to get you back out on bail, but you have to remand yourself back into my custody so I can give you back into the custody of the courts. So you want to learn how to bargain exchange and value exchange when you're communicating with people, because how you come off is going to determine whether somebody's going to be compliant or not, right? If you call a fugitive up and you're like, hey, MF, this, that, mofo, we're looking for you, we're going to come get you, and you start using scare tactics and intimidation, that just doesn't work. You're just going to piss off a fugitive who's probably not a very nice person to begin with. So what you really want to do is practice your active listening, practice your rhetoric, your verbal judo, and just be nice, because that will lighten your chances of gaining compliance and breaking down barriers. So California PC 832 continued. So fight or flight is a natural human response to a perceived threat. What that means is that we as human beings have inherited this amazing ability from nature to react to threats. This is something that we have from the times that we were cave people. All right, when we were hunters and gatherers, running around with spears and we were half naked. This is something that all or most people have, fight or flight, which is your body, your mind telling you that something may be a threat and you should just be cautious because you may have to run or you might have to stay and fight, depending on the severity of the threat and your capability to respond to that threat. All right. So your interview stance is 1 foot forward. If you ever look at cops or security officers, they have a kind of a wide stance, 1 foot back, 1 foot kind of forward, and they don't get too close to people, and they don't want to be too far in most cases, unless someone is a threat, an obvious threat, and you haven't gotten close to that person yet, then you really do want to keep your distance. Distance is your friend, but you want to be within arm's length of anyone that you're talking to, whether they're hostile or not. And what you also want to do is have your arms kind of where, this is your workspace, right? Like if you have your tool, if you have a tool belt, right? If you have a baton, which again, as a bounty hunter in California, you can't have a baton because that's a felony. But let's say you have your pepper spray on your belt and you have your firearm as well. You want to have your arms where this is your workspace. If you have to reach for any kind of a weapon, you'll be able to do so. But also, if you're talking to someone and you have your maybe bond paperwork in hand and you're explaining to them the situation, hey, we got to take you in on a misdemeanor warrant. This is why we're here for you. If a person attacks you, you'll be able to react. You can, if they strike you with their fist, you can catch their fist. And you can take them down or do whatever you have to do from there, or use pain compliance in accordance with your training, of course. So you want to always be ready, but you always want to be balanced 1 foot back. You don't want to be standing like you're ready to fight them, because you might cause them to react to that and perceive you as a threat, and then they will want to fight you, at which point your fugitive will become combative. So you don't want to do that, but you just want to be relaxed. You want to be nonchalant, casual. This is your workspace. You got your hands kind of up here where, if you have to fight, you have to intercept the strike, or if you do have to go for your pepper spray or something else, you're going to be able to do that. All right. And again, at arm's length. That way, you can grab control of a person if they're being hostile, right? But you're not too close to where they could just punch you. You can always retreat. You can always move forward. You can always retreat, depending on the situation. the dynamics of the situation can change fast. All right. So escalation of force, use of force continuum. Always de-escalate, active listening, practice your interview stance, which is also called the position or point of interview. Make that second nature. All right. De-escalate when you can, and that usually starts with the communication process. Actually, in the use of force continuum, it starts with your command presence. How you handle yourself as a professional, it begins with readiness and professionalism. So learn to be in your interview stance when around people. All right. So the more professional you look, the more compliance you're going to get. If somebody looks like they're insecure or unsure of themselves, and you're trying to project the image of an authority figure, a fugitive won't take you seriously, and they're sizing you up just like you're sizing them up, which you're supposed to. If you're a security officer, a cop, a bounty hunter, a private investigator, bail agent, you're supposed to be sizing up your fugitive. If that's what you're there to do, is to apprehend a fugitive, you're going to size that person up. Can that person take you down? Is that person possibly armed? Is there a bulge on their waistband somewhere that may be a gun or a weapon of some sort? So your job is to play what-if games, to question and say, what if this happens? How will I react? Will I fight? Will I retreat? Again, all the while considering the parameters of law. The next level of force from command presence is verbal command. So that requires active listening. You're not just shouting instructions at people, telling them, hey, turn around, let me see your hands. You're going to listen to what people have to say as well. If you're approaching somebody that's not an obvious threat, and it's let's say a little old lady, okay, who's just so happens to have a warrant, and you're there to bring her back into the custody of the courts. Clearly, that person's not a threat. You're not going to run up on that person and start grabbing on them, and you're not listening to what she's saying. She's telling you she has a broken arm, and you're over there trying to take her broken arm and put her in handcuffs, right? Or you're body slamming her down on the side of the road, practicing your MMA. That's bad. Don't do that. Whether you're a bounty hunter or a cop, that's a no bueno. So, what you want to do is you want to issue command accordingly to fit the situation. So that could be simply walking up on your fugitive casually and saying, hey man, can you turn around, place your hands behind your back, we got your warrant for your arrest, or you've got a warrant for your arrest. Or you want to say their name, right? You want to say so-and-so, because you're confirming that that's that person, and then you're telling them to turn around so you can cuff them up, right? You could do that casually and quietly. However, if somebody's coming at you and they're not yet combative, but they're taking a stance saying, hey, come on, and they're challenging you to a fight, you would use a different type of verbal command. You would say, hey, stop right there, get back. You come near me, we're going to have a problem. At which point, you can decide to show force. And let's say, draw your pepper spray. That's a show of force, right? It's also kind of a command presence, but that is a show of force. So if somebody's non-compliant to your verbal command and they're coming at you and they're aggressive, you have the right to defend yourself as a civilian, as a citizen, right? So you can go for your pepper spray and say, hey, stop right there, I will spray you. And your fugitive keeps coming at you, and then you spray them. Because they didn't comply. They put you in a position where you perceived them as a threat because they became an obvious threat, and they were aggressive, and they came at you, and you did everything you could to de-escalate by using verbal commands and saying, hey, stop, get back, let's talk about this, we're here to take you into custody, and at which point you had to use pepper spray. So those are just the dynamics of the situation, but you're going to learn more of that in Powers to Arrest. Now, always practice active listening. Always. Even when you're giving verbal commands, don't just shout at a person and not listen to what they're saying. Because sometimes situations differ. Somebody that might be shouting at you and might appear to be hostile, they might be trying to tell you something. It might be a disabled person who's deaf. And if they're using sign language, maybe they're not throwing up gang signs if they're a person who is deaf or hard of hearing. So every situation varies. Situations are different. You got to really learn to analyze the situation and understand the dynamics of a situation, especially as they progress. Show of force can be something as simple as taking an aggressive stance or holding your OC spray, right? Or by placing your hand on your firearm, which I don't advocate doing unless you are perceiving something that can potentially be an imminent threat that can cause serious injury or worse. If somebody is going for their waistband and they start fidgeting around upon you making contact with that person, and you're saying, and you know that that's your fugitive, right? And they start fidgeting around, reaching for their belt, they might be reaching for a weapon, right? So that would be a reasonable show of force. And that's just you practicing readiness. You're not trying to intimidate anyone. You're just getting ready in case they do pull a knife or a gun. You have a right to defend yourself. But this is why we want to practice good situational awareness. And we also want to verify that the person that we're coming in contact with really is the person that we're looking for, that has a warrant, that really is a fugitive in breach of a contractual agreement with the bail company that hired us to apprehend that fugitive. Soft techniques, OC spray, wrist locks, pain compliance. Pain compliance is basically you inducing pain to an individual until they comply. Now, you can't really do that as a citizen. You can't go around and just start poking at people or trying to induce pain to a fugitive if they're not combative. The only time you're really using pain compliance, it's necessary force, okay? That's required for you to effect the arrest. But if you are using any kind of other force, it's going to be in self-defense, right? You can't go and tase a guy because he's bigger than you and you don't know of any other way to place him in your handcuffs if he's not combative, right? If he's charging at you, that's a different thing. It changes the dynamics of a situation entirely. But soft techniques are OC spray. Soft techniques are OC spray, wrist locks, and pain compliance, which you're going to learn in your powers to arrest course. Hard techniques are strikes and takedowns, right? It's tackling people, taking them down, striking them in areas which are sensitive on the body, certain pressure points. That's something you're going to do in self-defense. With the exception of a takedown, obviously if you're going hands-on with a fugitive, you do want to take him down and get him into your handcuffs, but you don't want to start your encounter off with a takedown if they're not being combative. All right. And of course, deadly force, firearms, and strikes to vital areas. As a civilian or a citizen, deadly force is only in self-defense when you're defending yourself or someone else from serious injury or death. All right. So be very careful. If you're pulling that gun out and you're pointing it at someone, that means there's a situation that requires deadly force, because bounty hunters are not cops. Neither are private investigators or bail agents. You're just not. So police officers have discretionary powers. They have qualified immunity, which we talked about previously. Police officers can point their firearm at people as a show of force because, they believe that a person may be armed, or during felony stops, things like that. But bounty hunters cannot do that. So if you're a bounty hunter, you're not a cop. Do not point your guns at people. The only good reason to have your firearm out of your holster is if you're going into dark and enclosed dwellings, right? Especially at night. But you're not pointing the gun at people, because the moment that you point a gun at someone as a bounty hunter, remember, you're still a private citizen, You don't have any special authority. You've just committed assault with a deadly weapon by pointing a firearm at another human being. So be very cognizant of that. Because some bounty hunters out there go around and they get themselves into situations called bounty hunting gone wrong. All right.